Hello, my name is Anne Cedarhall, and I would like to welcome you to the Business Travel 360 podcast in conversation with, where we speak with travel industry movers and shakers that are transforming business travel. This podcast is designed so that you can gain insights into the company they represent and learn how they are capitalizing on the future of travel. Welcome, everybody. In this episode, we have the privilege of speaking with Tye Radcliffe, who is the Chief Customer Success Officer at Accelya. Accelya is a global software provider for the airline industry. A warm welcome, Tye. And my first question to you is the name Accelya. I said Accelya. I've heard people say Accelya. And it was so funny when I met with your colleague in London and she says, well, I pronounce it Accelya. That just cracked me up. And then she said, whatever floats your boat kind of thing. Yeah. But I guess it's Accelya. What is it, Tye?
The hack that I use is it's like accelerate. And if you want to be really informal, we're accelerating you. So I'm sure that the marketing people are rolling their eyes or worse, but we're accelerating the industry forward. Maybe that's a good way to remember it. So Accelya.
Accelya, that's absolutely brilliant. I just love it. It's great to have you here. Accelya is what I would call a leading NDC provider in the industry. You know, you're out there and you're doing NDC for a number of airlines, quite an impressive list.
Of all the NDC volume that we believe is occurring in the world at this moment, we transact 58% of those transactions.
Wow.
So I would say you're absolutely right when you say the leader, and I would say the next closest competitor, I think the last I heard was 8 times smaller than us. So we're by and far the largest NDC provider in the industry. We'll have implemented in the near future 20 airlines. And of those, of course, you have American, United, soon to be Delta, Lufthansa Group, Qantas, Emirates, etc. So lots of well-known large airlines that are trusting us to do NDC for them.
NDC, in some ways, sort of a troubling acronym or something that has been around forever. I mean, I can go back to, I was at ATPCO at the time when it all sort of began and started with the IATA and the resolution. If we could go back in time, Tye, if we could do it all over again, because it's been painfully slow. Let's agree on that. We can agree on. You've had a fantastic success as a company with it, but progress has been, I was at Lufthansa when I implemented you guys.
So think about this. First time I was introduced to NDC was around 2012. I was at United Airlines in the IT group, specifically supporting in distribution. And my boss at the time said, will you go over to this meeting in Europe with IATA and figure out what the heck's happening? What is this? And I remember I was talking to the guy that had gone to a previous meeting before me. And I said, so is it like an API for the industry, sort of to do bookings and shop? I'm not sure. That's literally all the information I had going into this thing. And this particular meeting, most IATA meetings are required to be on IATA property. This particular meeting in 2012, they had IATA offices in Geneva were full. So we actually met at a hotel in Nice. So when the boss says, go to Nice for a meeting, I'm like, absolutely. And I must have been, just sort of transported by the beauty of the Côte d'Azur. And I said yes to the working groups that they asked me to sign up for. And so hook, line, and sinker, came home, was chair of a shopping and booking task force. And I guess the rest is history. I've actually seemed to have based a career around new distribution capability. And I'm thankful for it because it is such a transformation of the industry. And I'm excited that it's happening at scale now. And so much so that we're actually, talking about what's coming next. But we'll get there, I suspect, in a moment.
I often say that I would really have liked for it to be sort of open source and more collaboration. Would you agree with that?
I think it's very much open source. But if you were to say to me, what should we have done differently from the start? The TMCs, the whole ecosystem was invited. I think a lot of people thought, this isn't real. It's so far off. I'm just not going to bother. And so we really struggled to get a lot of the expertise of the TMCs, the corporations, the mid office, the back office, all of those systems. We struggled to get them in the room to be part of the conversation. So you had folks like me that had worked for Amadeus before, who had worked for Travelport and Orbitz.com. We had Expedia very much in the room. So we tried to use that knowledge that we had to try and do our best to think about use cases for TMCs and corporations. But obviously we didn't do the best job. And, hindsight is 2020. Had we been able to show people what the future was going to be like, I think we could have gotten a lot more people in the room. And I think that's helping us for the next transformation that the industry is going for. Other than e-tickets, there hadn't been any massive transformation in the industry since the 60s. So when you say to people, hey, we're going to completely reinvent distribution, they're like, yeah, I've been doing this since the mid 60s. What could you possibly do that's tremendously different than how I do business today? It is a big difference. I do wish we could have been more forceful, more insistent that we had more people at the table as we designed NDC. I think that there were so many competing interests at the top, but I like to remind people, if you go back and look at some of the articles and things that were being written about NDC back in 2012, 2013, some work group, some subgroup had gotten together of super smart people thinking, what is every possible element of a customer that we should think about now so we don't have to go and change it later? A bit like when we were doing e-tickets, if we had thought that we should put a box on this ticket for a bag fee or a seat fee, we wouldn't even have EMDs today because we weren't thinking. So that group thought, well, I'm going to make that mistake again. So let's think about everything that we could possibly, so eye color and you name it, right? And so then that was used as evidence against NDC to say, look at the types of things that they're going to try to do. If you have brown eyes versus green eyes, you're going to pay more. And it's like, no, that's not what we're doing at all. We're just trying to be thoughtful. And so it seems like at every corner, people were just beating the group up. There was a lot of fear within the group, like, let's be super careful with what we say. And I think that caused some challenges with creativity as well. Just people were coming at us from all sides to try and stop it because it was a threat. People don't always like change. It was perceived as something that could put people out of business. And what's funny is it's specifically for travel agents. Not many airlines at all, if any, are using NDC for their own website. You don't need NDC to do direct channel distribution. You need it for travel agencies. And so the travel agencies who were like, you're trying to put us out of business with NDC, that's absolutely the opposite of what this was about. But it's hard to convince people of that at the time, right? There was a lot of fear and distrust. There were a lot of lawsuits going around with full content, things of that nature. It was a tumultuous time.
I think it's great that we have these kind of conversations and we actually talk about that and sort of explain the reasons why. And I always say it doesn't happen until it happens in the US. That's exactly what has happened with NDC. Forever, nothing happened. And then all of a sudden it was like kaboom. And you've got the US. Well, American Airlines had been there with NDC for a long time, but not really that much action, right? But then it was a big bang, wasn't it?
I remember, I think it was around 2015 when Lufthansa made their big moves in the market with distribution. That was revolutionary. And I think the whole world looked up and said, wow, Lufthansa is really doing some revolutionary things here. If there's ever the book of the history of NDC, when it's written, that will be a huge chapter. Because unfortunately, what a lot of people did is to conflate NDC with distribution cost surcharges and things of that nature. And they're absolutely two different things. But Lufthansa made some bold choices, and I think it's paid off for them. I think they are very much thought leaders in the distribution space. At the same time, American Airlines had been doing direct connects since the early 2000s, I think. In fact, if you think about Orbitz.com, and I worked there from around 2003 to 2005 or so, that was owned by airlines, and it was built on the idea of supplier link, which were APIs directly between the airlines and Orbitz. Now, they were using the open API standard at the time. There was no NDC. And I think that open API standard is good. In fact, in some ways, I like it more because you have hotel, you've got car, you've got air. where I think for whatever reason, the industry wasn't adopting it as quickly. It wasn't really driving transformation. And there was a moment when the industry was thinking about using the open API versus what we use now, which actually was donated by Fairlogic, which is now Accelya. So,
Yes.
so which we're quite proud of being
Yeah.
so pioneering with the industry. But American was doing NDC APIs from the beginning, so was United, so were several other airlines. I think that the things that they decided to do with removing content, because there is so much volume, right? The biggest airline or one of the biggest airlines in the world, when they decide to remove fares from the GDS, that's a big, big deal in terms of volume. And I think because of that volume, it really caused a lot of TMCs to sit up and take note. I think it really spurred a lot of folks, especially the GDSs, to say, look, we're already taking NDC seriously, but let's put some additional resources on this because our very important subscribers are now beating us up and saying, we've got to move faster. Maybe the relationships that the big TMCs had with the executives with the GDSs, maybe some of it's geographical, I don't know, but certainly it helped.
Yeah, it certainly did. It does require a sort of big bang, doesn't it? And something that I noticed in London when we were there recently, is that I think that the dialogue has gotten so much better between TMCs and airlines. It's really improved in my book.
1,000%. And up until recently, I was SVP of product strategy over NDC for Accelya. So I actually ran the product itself. Recently, I've just become chief customer success officer. And in that role, I have an NDC adoption team that I've built. And that team is specifically working with TMCs, online booking tools, OTAs, other leisure travel agencies to sort of say, let us come in, let's look at what you're doing and understand how we can remove the barriers to adoption and then bring that back into the product organization to say, let's think about these things, let's share this information with our airline customers and let them know what we're hearing so we can try and prioritize things on our roadmap to increase adoption for the whole industry. So as an example, a lot of times there's a team that's working with just one airline and they don't often get a chance to look across all of our airline customers. So let's say that a big agency has opened some bugs that they've seen. Let's zoom out. Let's go to 20,000 feet and say they've opened that same bug for this airline, this one. Bring that together and solve it and let's move faster. So I'm excited about that work.
It's a very nice sort of segue is the next big thing, right? Or one order. Something I also struggle with in this industry is why we obsess with all these naming conventions and all these acronyms. No, you can't say OMS, you have to say OOSD, and you have to, it's just like endless, isn't it? Or it's not NDC, it's called retailing or modern airline retailing. God forbid why this word modern. Again, I mean, I jokingly say, hey, Ryanair's been selling events for God knows how many years. Isn't that modern? What is modern? That's interesting. Why are we obsessed with the naming conventions? Love to hear your thoughts on that.
It's a good question. This industry is tied to TLAs, if you will, three-letter acronyms, because the technology has sort of required that you say things in as little characters as possible to save space for the systems themselves, for storage, etc. And we even catch ourselves, the old school folks, I need this from you. Or we still think sell 1, Y1, right? I mean, very much think in these GDS formats and three-letter acronyms. And so I think it's in our blood to an extent. But I also think from a marketing perspective, it's good for us all to align on what it is that we're trying to achieve. When we first started talking about one order was, I think, a very cool marketing message because it's about no longer do you have a PNR here and a copy of that PNR here and a copy of it in the departure control system. We're saying, no, let's all work off of the same order itself so there's no confusion. And so synchronization is not really needed because we're all operating off of a centralized version of this thing owned and controlled by the airline, which you couldn't, of course, do with legacy technology because there wasn't the compute power. There wasn't the storage capability. And that's what, new technology is bringing that capability to us. And this idea of getting rid of tickets and EMDs and the PNR itself and moving to a modern standard, I think is really exciting. And NDC, in my mind, that's laying the groundwork and the rails, if you will, so we can now do this new functionality on top of that. If we all just switched to a modern order management system, a new database structure that's flexible and open, et cetera, and then you try to do that without updating the messaging capability between agencies and GDSs and airlines, it wouldn't go very far. Good luck trying to insert a video into an EDIFACT message. It's not built for that. That's just one small example. Breaking down the elements of the PNR so that you don't necessarily have to build everything around the flight. That's why a hotel segment in a GDS is essentially, in many cases, used to look like a flight because everything was a flight.
Yeah, everything had to look like a flight. Also, those auxiliary segments.
It doesn't necessarily look like a flight now, but at the beginning, it definitely used to. And then think about all the SSRs and OSIs and all the elements that in the future will be so much easier to account for and process. So those are the types of things I think that are exciting. I think when people would say it's airline retailing, they'll say, no, wait a minute. I've been selling lounges, and as you mentioned, Ryanair has been selling lots of things, and I've been doing that for a long, long time. So how dare you call this airline retailing? Because I've been, okay, fine, we'll call it modern airline retailing, and you can employ AI and machine learning and do all these things because the data set is now in this open, rich place that you can apply those things to it without having to teach the AI and the ML the elements of a PNR. Remember print, phone field, receive from, itinerary, name field, tell it. Let's not have to teach a machine what this means and just let it talk to a modern database so it can do the cool things it needs to.
But I mean, what's really important here is to sort of move away from PNR centricity. And I mean, both you and I know that so many of the systems in this industry have traditionally been built on PNR centricity. Personally, the first time I started to talk about orchestration or order management, that was back in 2014. But of course, there's been sort of an explosion in the last year where everyone seems to sort of get this, what I think is pretty basic, right? We need to, just like you said, we don't need to talk about elements in a PNR. We need to be able to get lots of content into an order, get 10 PNRs into an order if we want to.
A lot of people ask, and I think it's a fair question, why didn't we do one order first? If we had done one order first, then doing NDC is like you have to do it. It's sort of the impetus. And one order came out pretty soon, that concept, pretty soon after NDC started. But it was just so mind-boggling. You start talking to an airline about not having tickets anymore. Back then, you were met with rare exception. You were met with a lot of concern and frustration. And I remember jokingly at conferences, I would say, you guys are sitting here talking about how scary NDC is. Let's talk about one order. And, just sort of a hush falls over the room like, no, we're not ready to talk about one order. Please, let's continue talking about NDC. I do think that, yes, it would have been awesome if we could have started with it. I think it would have solved a lot of problems, but we couldn't because it was hard enough just getting folks to talk about new messaging standards.
In the discussion we've had recently, because there is a lot of confusion, remember in London, people talk about a massive, gigantic transformation that everything will have to cost an absolute fortune and everything has to change. I personally don't believe that. I think that you can sort of take it step by step and you will have to live in a world where so many systems exist in parallel. I mean, you can sort of easily say, well, I'm pretty happy with what I've got. So in my book, I think it's great to have OMS or a retailing system to help you. That sort of alleviates a lot of pain. And of course, yes, you can move towards a PSS that is modern and is order-based. Would you say that Accelya is, you're moving towards being, an OMS, right? The retailing capabilities here. You're not going into the hosting environment of things.
Accelya will be able to completely replace any legacy PSS that's out there in the very near future.
Wow.
And think about the pieces and parts, right? A big part of an airline's passenger service system is the ability to offer content. We have Shop and Price, which is powering many of the world's largest airlines today. It's our own shopping engine. We have FlexM, which is our merchandising tool. FlexM is used by some of the world's largest airlines as well. Everything that United Airlines sells that is not included on a ticket is priced by FlexM, whether it's an extra legroom seat, an upgrade that is not using a fare, like a dynamically priced upgrade, which can be bought post-ticketing, for example. In fact, all of the dynamic mileage calculation that you see when you're redeeming miles at United is using our technology to make that possible. And many other airlines throughout the world are using FlexM as well. In fact, FlexM can be used to modify the shopping result itself. And many of our airline customers are doing that. And not only for NDC, but for their direct channels as well. So I would argue that we have one of the strongest sets of offer capabilities in the industry. Of the OOSD, offer, order, settle, deliver, we have got the first O squarely taken care of. The next O, if you will, on the offer side, we have stood up our new order management system. It lives in the AWS. In fact, all of our technology is powered by AWS. And so we've built the order management system inside of AWS. It's cloud native, function as a service, software as a service. It is serverless. We're using Lambda functions, and it is absolutely state of the art. I would say the latest order system in the industry. We're using DynamoDB. It's the same technology that Amazon uses for their own retailing system. When you buy something off Amazon, they store it in the DynamoDB. We're using the technology that powers the greats. Right now, there are live orders sitting in our order management system, and we're putting more and more in there every day. And as you can imagine, it can absolutely handle the volume. Now we're building capabilities around our order management system. Think of things like IROPS, right? We're working to integrate IROPS handling and processing. We already have a payment solution, right? So we're integrating our payment solution into our OOSD platform. And obviously, we have one of the industry's best, if not the best, revenue accounting, order accounting systems out there. And it is already ready for orders. We have already done the work to integrate the order messages into our revenue accounting system. So we have true order accounting stood up as well. So we're ready. Product catalog is built on the heart and architecture of FlexM so that we can offer our product catalog capabilities. Because think about it, in the future, if you are not filing every fare, you need a place to sort of define the rules and define all of the things that for your product, and that's going to be in our product catalog. So we're ready.
So, I mean, I literally can, in future sometime, I can go off a traditional PSS and I can actually join the world of Accelya. Wow.
That's right. There are RFPs that are happening right now that we're responding to in this space. We're competing with the traditional players in the market to offer our new OOSD capabilities. I believe you will see us signing deals with carriers in the very near future. If I could just go back for a second, and one of the interesting things you said is that can you do pieces of modern airline retailing, a piece at a time? And my answer to that is absolutely. The way that we're architecting this is very modular. If you just want to start with offer system, great. If the first thing you want to change is to use our stock keeper and our product catalog, great. You want to use our order management system, but somebody else is shopping, that's fantastic. So we're absolutely modular, and we mean it when we say it. And so, yes, we think that there is value that can be derived in little pieces along the journey so that you don't have to do a big bang, because we know that that is a scary proposition for many airlines. And we're not in this business to scare people. We're in this business to comfortably take them from where they are today to the future, piece by piece, gain value along the way, de-risk as much as possible, and make a comfortable transition to the modern retailing world.
On such a positive note, I want to thank you so much, Tye, for joining me today, joining Business Travel 360 podcast. It's been a pleasure, as always, talking to you, and thank you for sharing. And we're looking towards a much better future, right?
Absolutely. It's exciting to talk about this future, to be a part of it, and to think back in 2012, where we were then to where we are now. People think it's moved slow. Okay, I understand it's an industry that has a lot of moving pieces, and you're moving pieces of it together as you go, right? But we're getting there.
Fantastic. You really made my day. Thank you so much, Tye.
It's my pleasure.